to get hers. I wish somebody had told me that grief, guilt, and shame would take over my life emotionally, and that at each anniversary date I would feel numb and unable to move, and that I would later consider suicide twice based on the fact of my choice. I wish someone had showed ultrasound to me so that I knew that my fetus really wasn't just a blob of tissue, because when 7 years later I was pregnant with my son Davis, who is now 17, the hardest part of being pregnant with him was watching the ultrasounds every month and seeing something grow inside of me, which I knew I terminated 7 years prior. I wish someone had told me that I would never be able to have other children after being raped and having a second abortion when my son was 2. I also wish somebody had told me that I would be forced to have an emergency hysterectomy due to the complications that was caused to my uterus after the second abortion. I wish someone had told me that my life would just be completely different. I'm glad that when I finally did admit my sin and go through a recovery program, that there was healing in Christ and that I could be forgiven for the sins that I committed. That's an accepting hearts and compassion of a few select women could assist in the healing of my disgrace. And that healing program would release me from 23 years of guilt and shame and grief. You know, I'm glad that somebody did tell me that God was in the room with me during my abortions. He held my hand through both procedures and personally carried my children home to heaven, because that vision keeps me going every day. And that through God I could name my children, Jillian and Dory, and that they could be with me every day here on earth in my thoughts. And that when I finally get to heaven, Dylan and Dory won't remember why I haven't held them, hugged them, or kissed them. And I'm glad somebody told me that someday I would be blessed to talk about my unborn children to young men and women in high schools and colleges, to congregations and fundraisers and awareness events, and even to my very own son, who by doing so would commit his life to Christ and the miracle of defending life itself. I'm glad somebody told me to share this all with you.
God protected me from having an abortion. He gave me an awareness of the value of life. However, I did suffer because of abortion. When I was a teenager, my mother asked me to go with her to an abortion clinic. This was in Cuba, where abortion was very, very common. And the same doctors that we saw at the clinic had a private office where they did abortions, even though abortion on demand was not legal in Cuba at that time. I begged my mother not to abort that child. I did everything that I could. I said to her, I will raise it, Mom. And I was only a teenager, an adolescent. I will raise it. I will take care of it for you. And she smiled and she said, well, what would people think? Look how old you are already. And I remember sitting in that clinic inside and waiting for her to finish and just wondering what I could have done more. I was not a Christian. I didn't have any pictures to show her. I didn't really know how bad abortion was. In my heart, I felt that it was something bad, but I never really knew until I saw the pictures. And I never really knew for many years how much anger I had inside of me against my mother. It took years. We were never close after that. I attempted suicide shortly after that. And most of my life, I felt that I had to really be the best at everything, because I had to make it worthwhile that she allowed me to be born. I later found out that she had aborted other children. And every time we sat at the dinner table, I would look and think about those that were not there. There is tremendous pain when you are a sibling and your mother aborts. And I'm sure that there are many people out there that are feeling this pain. I gave my testimony to a group of people last night, and several people came up to me and said something similar. I got involved in the pro-life movement, and I have been in it for over 30 years. And when I first saw the abortion pictures, when I saw the one about the DNC baby that comes out in pieces, that's the type of abortion that was done in Cuba. And a voice, interior voice, said to me, that's what your brother looked like when he was aborted. And I wrote a letter to the brother that I have not met, that I will meet in heaven. Brothers and sisters, abortion hurts. For years, I went through post-abortion syndrome. I didn't know that you could go through post-abortion syndrome if you haven't had an abortion yourself, but I did. I have a type of cancer that is very deadly, and my sister lives in Fort Myers. My brother lives somewhere else. I would have had a brother or a sister to help me through this difficult time that I'm going through. And I lost most of my family to abortion. My mother had 8 abortions. And my mother realized what she had done when she saw one of my presentations. It was a great pain for me to have her present. I never told her how bad it was. But she came to one of my presentations and she saw what abortion is. And she used to say to me, if only I had known. I love all my children. If only somebody had told me, if only I had known. Till the day she died, she regretted her abortions. God bless you.
My name is Susan, and I'm from Missoula, Montana. Abortion hurts women. That's why I'm here today, to testify the truth I know, the personal story way. My abortion hurts me more than I in words can say. 32 years later, I haven't forgotten the pain of the surgical procedure and how I'd gone astray. I clung to the nurse's arm as the, quote, pregnancy was suctioned from me. I laid there in shock. Blood was all I could see. In recovery, a few minutes later, the abortion doctor came into the room. A dark cloud of death hung overhead had I met my doom. He sat down beside me, and with compassion, it seemed, he told me all went well. I should have no trouble with future pregnancies, he came to tell. In a moment of relief, I thought everything would be all right. From that point on, though, I was really uptight. The drive back to Montana was one of silence. I was numb. Back at my apartment that night, I realized what I had done. It seemed so simplistic as I went along with the plan to hide my sin of sex outside of marriage with this man. He promised we would have children when the time was right, and stupid me, to save the relationship, I put up no fight. I gave him my virginity and the only child I would conceive. The dream of having children eluded me, that gift I would never receive. How could my life continue? The guilt, the shame, the grief, physically, emotionally, spiritually affected. For me, death would be a relief. Suicide is common in lives tormented by abortion grief. It is most certainly true that the devil is a thief. On Mother's Day Sunday, just 6 months later, God's plan for me would unfold. A sermon on the prodigal son text, my story told. Even though neither the pastor nor my parents knew the story was about me, I took it to heart, confessed my sins, and I was set free. That day, post-abortion healing for me began as I realized God knew everything about me and still had a plan. There would be no children when the time was right. How could I bear it? I put up no fight. Abortion made legal isn't the answer. So many women suffering silently in pain. Nothing have the generations since Roe versus Wade had to gain. Trying to make sense of life after my abortion, to God's word I went. Forgiveness, comfort, understanding, for me, God meant. Several years later, I met my husband. We chose not to talk about the past. And the subject of abortion came up one day, and when I told him I had had one, he was aghast. So now 4 lives had been affected. Abortion isn't as simplistic as it seems. There are many victims, young and old. Today's decisions may be the death of tomorrow's dreams. You won't just get over it, as some may tell you to, and you may never have the kind of marriage relationship you'd hoped for or the children you'd longed for too. You may become an abortion instead of a mother or wife, and you will regret it the rest of your life. Marriages hang in the balance as abortion is rampant these days. I have cause to wonder what part abortion plays. Working with the post-abortive has brought joy and gratitude to the depths of my soul. No more will I be silent. God wants every woman wounded by abortion to be made whole. Psalm 147:3 says, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. If you have had an abortion, there is hope for you. God forgave me, and He wants to forgive you too.
And I'm speaking to you today because I regret the abortion that I had in 1974. It was the cruelest decision I have ever made. It was cruel to my husband, who would not talk me out of it, who could not talk me out of it, and who would go through life wondering, as Miguel, was it a girl or a boy? It was cruel to our only daughter, who was 18 months old, who was going to miss her brother and sister very much as she grew up alone. It was cruel to my brother and sisters and my parents, who would be forever deprived of a niece or a nephew or a grandchild. But the one who suffered abortion's cruelty the most was myself. If I had taken a razor blade to my wrist or swallowed a bottle of pills, the damage to myself would have resulted in my own death. But I did not die from my abortion. My baby did. My death came slowly afterward, as I drifted into self-destructive behavior that somehow would justify my own inhumanity to my child. I was not only trying to destroy myself, but everybody that loved me. Because how could anyone love or forgive a woman who kills her own child? I went even so far as to sterilize myself at the age of 30, so that I would not have to come to terms with the little person that was waiting for me in heaven. The thought of another pregnancy terrified me. Loving another child and being loved by that child was something I did not deserve. As the years went by, my wall of silence surrounding my second child began to break down. God was calling me from outside of the prison I had made in my heart. I felt compelled to reach out to other women and girls to tell them the truth about the choice of abortion. I began to work at a Birthright Crisis Pregnancy Center on FM 1960 in Spring, Texas. I felt somehow that I had been given a second chance. I shared with hundreds of scared women and girls why they should give themselves and their babies a chance to live. How the sound of the vacuum would haunt them forever. I showed them what the baby actually looked like in their tummy. My own baby, however, remained an elusive nightmare hidden in my heart. How could I ever know that God would work a healing in me that I would never suspect or ask for? Our only daughter was 17 years old, and I suspected that she was pregnant. We ran the test, and it confirmed her dad's and my fears. She was indeed pregnant. The psalm, "The sins of the fathers would be visited on the sons," blared in my brain. I told my little girl my darkest secret about my abortion and hoped it would dissuade her from ending the life of her baby and ruining her own. The father of the baby and Planned Parenthood used all their lies to convince her that abortion was the only rational thing to do because of her age. And by the way, she was a minor at the time. The abortion was scheduled for May the 11th. On the night of May the 10th, I finally began to mourn the loss of my own baby and the grandchild that I thought that I would never see. The identity of my own child came racing finally into my heart. Our daughter went down to the Planned Parenthood abortuary on Fannin in Houston for her scheduled abortion. But God had other ideas for this young mother and her baby, as well as her grandma. The doctor inserted the suction aspiration machine into her uterus, the standard, 3 times. She was 11 weeks pregnant. They sent her home bleeding and in a lot of pain. What they did not suspect that the doctor missed the baby entirely. God placed his hand inside her uterus and said, "Not this one, not this time." Her due date was December the 25th. And as I gazed down into the eyes of this precious miracle, I saw the face of all God's unborn children. I saw the face of my child, and I knew I was forgiven. Abortion is about maiming the deepest and strongest instinct of a woman or a young girl. Even when you think you cannot be forgiven, remember, he will never forsake you.
When I was 13, I got pregnant, and for months I didn't realize anything was wrong because my period was not regular at that time. When I did go to the doctor, she told me I was 5 months pregnant. My parents convinced me that an abortion was the only answer. Because I was so far along in the pregnancy, I had to fly to Kansas to have the abortion. The procedure took 5 days. Every morning my dad would drive our car through the crowd of protesters gathered around the gates as they screamed at me, held signs of dead fetuses, and banged on my window. During the 5-day procedure, my cervix was slowly forced to dilate, which caused the worst cramps I've ever felt. On the 4th day, as I lay on an examination table, my baby began to kick frantically, more than she had ever before. I didn't realize what was going on, but somehow she knew. The doctor entered with a large needle that he had shot into my belly. After that, I never felt my baby move again. The next morning, I entered a large room with about 5 other women. We were all placed in our own hospital beds and hooked up to an IV that was meant to put us in a twilight state of consciousness. Unfortunately, I remember every detail of the experience. I was freezing, shaking, cramping, and alone. Someone gave me 2 little pills I thought would make me feel better, but instead they forced me into labor. The nurse walked down the baby-killing assembly line to see if we were dilated, and then one by one took us off into a separate room. When it was my turn, I was surprised to enter a small room with what seemed to be a toilet. I was told to sit on the toilet, lean on the nurse, and push. So I did. I pushed my dead baby out into a toilet. After all this trauma, I lay on another examination table waiting for the doctor, and a nurse placed her hand on my stomach and said with a smile, "Look how skinny you are now." I just cried. For weeks after the procedure, I was severely depressed. I rarely got out of bed. My body was bleeding and confused because it thought I should have a baby, but there was no baby to care for. Eventually, I did get out of bed, but I battled depression to this day, and I have been suicidal many times in my life. I have used drugs and alcohol. I was promiscuous. I had very little self-worth and developed bulimia. I hated my parents and rebelled in any way I could. I have been in therapy since the abortion, and within the last couple years, I have made a lot of progress. I was caringly persuaded to attend a Rachel's Vineyard retreat in April 2005. This retreat changed my life because although I have always heard God forgives you, I never felt it like I did on the retreat. His mercy was falling like rain all around me, but I had an umbrella up. The retreat helped me to fold my umbrella, and when I did, I was drenched in the forgiveness God was pouring out all along. Being with the other woman helped a lot as well. I saw that other women had made the same mistake I did, and I didn't condemn them, so I realized I needed to stop condemning myself. People need to know that the babies our country allow to be murdered every day are not lumps of mass, but living children with souls and worth. I felt my baby move inside of me. She had a personality. I left that baby dead in a toilet, and my story is multiplied day after day, baby after baby. It is absurd to think that abortion is a solution to any problem. The hurt and pain doesn't end after the baby is gone. I had thought I would just get over it. We are told as women we have a choice, but no one explains what we are choosing. I doubt many would choose to feel the way I have for the last 10 years, so that is why I am silent no more.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and this is my first March for Life, and I pray for all of us that this is our last. You know, you're going to hear a lot of testimonies, and I've heard several here from women referring to the guy in their life that played a role in their abortion. I'm here today because I was that guy. About 26 years ago, after a tour in the Army and in my first year of college, I got a girl pregnant. One of us was in love, and it wasn't me. I bought into the lies that by writing an inexpensive check, my problem could easily go away. And I used all the common excuses and lies that we were told. And this was my reasoning for not living up to my responsibility. I was still in college, I was too young, no money, and of course I knew that we had no future together. Besides, it's only a blob of tissue. That was the biggest lie, and that was the closure on how I distanced myself from that actual act that was about to be done. And by being the guy, it gave me the added advantage to distance myself by even farther. I did not have to go through the process that you're hearing these ladies describe today. All I had to do was drive her to the clinic and pick her up afterward. We never talked about it after that, and neither did I for 26 years, never a word. Because of those lies, it was easy to bury. About 10 years ago now, when I came back to my faith and got married, it was then that I truly realized what I had done. When the doctors told my wife and I that we could not have our own children, the emotions and that guilt came pouring in. Was I being punished for not protecting my first child? As a man, we are called to be the protectors, especially of the young. But because of those lies, I ran away from that responsibility. I murdered that child, my child. No semantics, no excuses, no lies can defend or describe it as anything other than that. And I regret my lost fatherhood. But I was not being punished, and I have been forgiven.